Welcome to PFF Free Agency Live, the Friday edition. We got a trio of PFF's young bucks here. Some of the young guys from PFF ready to talk free agency, some winners, some losers, best available, and breaking down the recent moves. I think the first one on the table has to be this Todd Gurley signing by the Atlanta Falcons. He's an Atlanta guy, former UGA running back, goes to Atlanta. I think they're paying him $6 million per year. Then the Rams are paying him over $7 million. He's going to make $11 million as a 25-year-old running back in today's NFL. What's your opinion of the Falcons signing, Ben, for Todd Gurley?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an outstanding deal for the Falcons. I don't think it's a bad deal either. 1 year, $5 million. There's not a whole lot of risk on that contract. He was still a good runner of the football last year, even though he only averaged 3.8 yards per carry. That was largely due to just how bad the offensive line was in front of him. He's definitely gotten worse as a receiving running back over the last few years, but at just 1 year, $5 million, there's not a whole lot of risk for Atlanta.
You know, I strongly disagree with your take, Ben, for a few reasons. I mean, last year, the Falcons, they were an atrocity. It was bad. The offense was not the problem. It was the defense. And now they add a running back when they should have been addressing the secondary. And they cut Desmond Trufant. And they spend what little cap space they had on Todd Gurley. I mean, he's going to have better production this year just because the offensive line is better. I mean, the Falcons' offensive line, they're an above average run blocking unit. But they could have used that money to someone maybe like Clinton Dix. I mean, he got 1 year for $4 million. I mean, I think that money would have been better suited, trying to patch up that secondary because right now it is bad.
I'm with you're a running back truther now. The remote work from home environment has plagued your understanding. I think with the Falcons, yes, it's a low risk move. Yes, it's a low risk move. They're not tied to a ton of money down the road, which is good for any running back contract right now. But I agree with Tresh in terms of that money's better spent on a guy like Brian Poole, who can play the slot for you, who signed with the Jets, I think near $5-6 million, what that contract was. Mackenzie Alexander signing with the Cincinnati Bengals for a 1 year, $4 million deal. The Clinton Dix deal. It's going to be interesting to see what Emmanuel Sanders and what Robbie Anderson get, because those guys play a more valuable position. I think the average per year will be similar for those two guys in free agency. It's an interesting move. I agree, low risk. Not a ton of money on the books down the road, but that money is better spent in 2020, especially for a team that's on the cusp for a Super Bowl. Let's move to a running back contract. Actually, I like even less. Melvin Gordon signing with the Denver Broncos, 2 years, I think $16 million with $5 million guaranteed. I'm ditching you, Ben. I'm starting with Tresh. You can't like this deal.
Not at all. I mean, this really broke my heart because I was going through the Broncos moves this past week, and I was like, I'm really a big fan of what they've done. I mean, they franchise tag Justin Simmons. They're going to try and bring him back on a long-term deal, which is smart. I mean, he was the most valuable safety of 2019 in Vic Fangio's system. I mean, he was pretty bad before that, but that's a good move bringing him back. And then they pretty much stole Jarrell Casey and AJ Bouye via trade, which are both great moves. I mean, they kind of had down years last year, but still, those are great moves to have. And Graham Glasgow, I mean, granted, it was 4 years, $44 million, but those are all four really good moves, and there was really nothing to complain about with what they've done. And then they lay this on me, and I was like, come on. I mean, I was ready to hype them up all along, especially on this live show we have here. But I just really don't like this move. I mean, Philip Lindsay, he produced a higher 2-year PFF grade than Melvin Gordon. He's getting paid less than $1 million. I mean, what are we doing here? Giving him $13.5 million guaranteed? I mean, this is just bad. Ben, I hope you're on the other side of this one and do not like this.
Yeah, I am not on board with this deal for the Broncos. If you look at Gordon, he's a guy who over the last 2 years, he's outside the top 40 running backs in PFF receiving grade. He's not going to add a whole lot of value there. And they already have Philip Lindsay and Royce Freeman who can handle the rushing duties. For 2 years, $16 million, most of it guaranteed. I just can't get on board with that for Denver.
I mean, you talk about a Denver Broncos team that struck gold with Philip Lindsay as an undrafted free agent. They're paying him next to nothing for his services at the running back position and getting good production from him. It does not make sense to allocate $13.5 million guaranteed to Melvin Gordon in this situation. Again, it comes back to similar things I said about the Todd Gurley contract in Atlanta. That money is better well spent at other positions of higher value, safety, cornerback, receiver, with guys like Emmanuel Sanders, not going to come back to Denver probably, but Robbie Anderson, probably a fit for Denver if they did have the cap space. I think that money is better spent elsewhere. Let's move to another deal of late. Andrus Peat signing a monster deal, a re-signing with the New Orleans Saints, 5 years, $33 million guaranteed. Ben, let's kick it off. What's your opinion of this?
I mean, I think this might be the worst deal that's gone down so far in free agency out of everyone. That's a whole lot of money for a guard that, if you look at the PFF grade, since he moved to left guard in 2018 to be their starter, it's 41st out of 41 qualifying players at the position. So you're paying over $10 million per year, over $30 million guaranteed to that player, when the Saints also have needs at receiver. They could better use that money on someone like Robbie Anderson to get downfield. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I was ready to see them sign a wide receiver. I was ready. I was thinking, is it going to be Brashad Perriman, Robbie Anderson? Who's it going to be? And then I find out Pete gets this massive deal. I mean, I thought it was a typo. I thought it was almost a fake account. You're scrolling through Twitter and you see that and you're like, no, this can't be true. But it was. He's been the second least valuable guard over the last 2 seasons. I mean, he was pretty consistent his first 3 years, but we're talking a 39.8 grade in 2018, 48.7 grade in 2019. If he would have been as consistent these last 2 years as he was his first 3 years, I could maybe understand the steal, but I just don't. I mean, I think it was a bad move.
I mean, this guy must be the nicest man in the locker room. To re-sign him at this contract is just absurd. $33 million guaranteed, over $10 million average per year for a guy that has not graded well in PFF system. Interesting, New Orleans, I think, again, values in free agency is overspending in free agency, specifically with guaranteed money on multi-year contracts. I think this is a loss for the New Orleans Saints. Moving forward here, Eric Ebron signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers on, I think, a good deal for them. I think the tight end position, if this is one that the Steelers need to help at, I think Eric Ebron does that. Ben, kick us off.
Yeah, I do think this is a good deal for the Steelers. If you look at their roster, they could use some help at tight end. Vance McDonald was a guy who battled injuries in 2019. And even when he was on the field, he wasn't all that productive, had less than 1 receiving yard per route run. And Ebron is someone who was actually ahead of Austin Hooper on our free agent rankings coming into this week. So if you look at his contract compared to Hooper's, Ebron's in the range of guys like Nick Boyle, Tyler Croft, CJ Uzoma, players like that. So I think this is a pretty solid deal for the Steelers to add another weapon for Ben Roethlisberger coming back, for a guy who has graded pretty well, consistently above average over the last couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, and you're looking at the projected contract that our friends at Over the Cap provided us. I mean, he was projected to get about 3 years, $7.5 million per year with $14 million guaranteed. So I think this is a really good deal for the Steelers. I mean, granted, his hands are bad. I mean, sometimes I'm wondering if he didn't, have some popcorn before he had some butter all over his fingers, because it's bad. I mean, he had a 13.9% drop rate last year. I mean, that was one of the worst, second worst at his position. But he's an athletic guy. He can play anywhere on the field. And I think that's going to be a huge advantage for him, especially with Big Ben coming back. We don't know what that's going to happen. I think some people are kind of overrating that fact just because there's so much unknown. I mean, he could really go out there and just have his elbow start hurting, and he'll have to, they'll have to roll with Mason Rudolph again. But that's another story for another day. But I do like this move for the Steelers. I think they got a good price.
Yeah, Ebron, to provide context to that drop rate number, anything over 10% for receiver or tight end is where you get into that bad territory from a drop standpoint. And I like this move for the Steelers, largely because tight end isn't a position you get immediate return from the draft. I mean, it's rare that you see a tight end come out of the draft and produce at a high level early in his career. It's a position that peaks late. It's why you see Jared Cook, Mercedes Lewis, Jimmy Graham sticking around, because later in their NFL careers, they start to actually perform. I think Eric Ebron, not a ton of money allocated to him at a position that you really can't fill in the draft. Moving forward here, we're going to jump. Give me a winner, Tresh, a winner in free agency so far.
Oh, the Los Angeles Chargers for sure. I mean, you're going through what the moves they made. They needed a tackle. They needed one badly. They ranked dead last in pressure rate allowed last year at the tackle position. They got Brian Bulaga on a really good deal, in my opinion. 3 years, $30 million. And you're looking at it. He's been a top 10 right tackle in PFF pass block grade every single season since 2014. I mean, they really needed some help there, and they went out and got it. And they franchise tagged Hunter Henry. And, he did have some injuries the last couple of years. But in his first 2 seasons, he was third in PFF receiving grade behind only Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce. I mean, that's really good company to be in. And then you're talking about Chris Harris Jr., too, that I kind of didn't really see coming, locking down the slot, moving back over from outside where he kind of struggled. But, I mean, he was one of the most valuable slot corners we've seen in the PFF era. So I think that's a really good move. And now I'm thinking about who are they going to take at 6? Does Jeff Okudah fall there? I mean, Sam Monson tweeted that out, and he looked at the secondary and everything. If they get a guy like Jeff Okudah, or even find a way to get Isaiah Simmons, I'm not sure how that's even going to look. But I'm excited to watch this Chargers team next year.
Yeah, and I like the Philadelphia Eagles. I like what they've done so far. If you look at some moves they made on their defense, bringing in Darius Slay for a third and a fifth round pick. I know he didn't grade as well last year, but this guy is still a top 5 cornerback in the NFL. If you look back at a larger sample, he's top 5 cornerback in PFF WAR, most forced incompletions since 2014. This is a game changer on their defense. He can line up and play press man against number 1 receivers. That's what he did in Detroit, and he does it well. And then if you look at the defensive line, Javon Hargrave is a really underrated player. He's a guy on the Steelers who improved each year when he was there, and he's bull rushes Marshall Yanda. I was going back and watching some of his tape. He had some really impressive reps, and he had the 3rd highest pressure rate at the position behind Chris Jones and Aaron Donald. This is a guy who's on his way up, and getting him for $13 million per year is a strong move for Philadelphia.
Yeah, I like what the Philadelphia Eagles have done. Darius Slay and Javon Hargrave are 2 really good players. I think the teams that move the needle the most are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for adding Tom Brady, and Phillip Rivers to Indianapolis Colts really does make the Colts a contender next year. But my winner is going to be the Baltimore Ravens for working the trade market. Grabbing Calais Campbell from the Jags for a 5th was fantastic. Offloading Hayden Hurst for a 2nd-round pick in return. You love to see that. And also, Chris Wormley recently traded for a 5th-round pick. Guys that they swung and missed on, and Hayden Hurst and Chris Wormley, they're still getting value in return, and they go grab Calais Campbell with open cap space to fill the need with Michael Pierce leaving. I think the Ravens, a smart franchise, continue to do smart things. Let's get to the franchises that maybe have lost this free agency. Ben, highlight a loser for me.
Yeah, I mean, it might be going a little bit on the back burner now because it happened so long ago, but the Houston Texans, I mean, what are they doing? DeAndre Hopkins is worth well over a 2nd-round pick, which is essentially what they got for him. And they had to take on the bloated contract of David Johnson. And if you look at recent deals, like they just traded 2 first-round picks for Laramie Tunsil, who is not nearly as valuable as DeAndre Hopkins. If you look at the recent deals for Odell Beckham Jr., Stephon Diggs, very good wide receivers, but not quite at that same level as Hopkins, those teams all got more. It's just a really, really bad trade for Houston. And then they go out and probably overpay Randall Cobb, which isn't exactly going to help things at wide receiver. I just think it's hard not to pick them as the biggest loser so far.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, I agree with you on that. But I think the biggest loser of this past week has to be the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, their best move was cutting a player, Xavier Rhodes. I mean, outside of that, I can't say they did anything better for them. I mean, they traded away Stephon Diggs. They got a load of draft picks. But why? I mean, this guy is one of the top wide receivers in the game ever since he came in. I mean, him and Adam Thielen were one of the best wide receiver duos, and now Buffalo has arguably the best wide receiver unit in the AFC conference. And then you're looking at who they paid. Michael Pierce, 3 years, $28 million, $18 million guaranteed. And we're talking about building the trenches, but you really need to be building the secondary. And right now they have no one. I mean, you're talking about Mackenzie Alexander earlier, a very underrated slot corner. He produced an above average slot coverage grade when he was there with the Vikings, and they're let Trey Waynes go too. I mean, it was just a bad week all around. And I really think next year might be a losing season for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I don't like a lot of the moves that the Vikings have done. I would call them the biggest loser in face, one of the biggest losers, largely because, yes, they traded Stephon Diggs, but I think they got a lot in return, a good enough value in return. I will say this, though. I said this earlier in the show. How you lose in free agency is overspending. Another way to lose is inconsistent roster building. And that's what you see with the Vikings, extending Kirk Cousins to get into that window, but then going ahead and trading away Stephon Diggs. It's inconsistent. Are you trying to win now or are you trying to win down the road? I think at the back end of the first round, they'll be able to add some receiving talent because this class is so deep, but definitely inconsistent and some confusing moves for the Vikings. My loser is going to be the Jets. They tried to address need along the offensive line. They signed George Fant, which I do not like. He has not had a ton of snaps at offensive tackle, has not graded well for PFF. Also re-signed Alex Lewis at depth level money. But again, another player that is not particularly good. I do like Connor McGovern. That signing was okay. But they tried to address needs to open up availability for that 11th overall pick. I still think offensive line is a need, and so is wide receiver. They need to help Sam Darnold. He's still on a rookie contract. You need to get the best out of that rookie contract window, and I don't necessarily think they did with the moves they've made in free agency. Speed round here. We're going to go rapid fire. Tresh, starting with you. Best available free agent and the fit for you.
Emmanuel Sanders, Green Bay Packers. I mean, outside of Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers has nobody. I mean, absolutely nobody. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Geronimo Allison. I mean, all these guys he's had, none of them produced a PFF grade above 70.0. I want to see Emmanuel Sanders in that offense with Devontae Adams, perhaps another receiver in this upcoming draft, really give something to really have Green Bay build that Super Bowl run. I think it's there that they need to address one of the most valuable positions on the field, and that's wide receiver. Ben, what do you got from it?
Yeah, well, Austin talked a little bit about the Jets addressing offensive line with some questionable moves, but two areas they haven't addressed are wide receiver and cornerback. They got Brian Poole to fill in the slot, but they still need some help on the outside, and one of the top guys available is Prince Amukamara. He's a guy who I think could come in and sort of solidify one of those starting cornerback spots, and it will allow them to free up their options in the first round, maybe take a wide receiver to take on that number one role.
My best fit might not happen because they just signed Melvin Gordon, but Drew Lock did his best with Emmanuel Hall at Missouri, a speedster that can really fly down the football field. I think Robbie Anderson to the Denver Broncos makes a ton of sense for me. There's a need at wide receiver since the loss of some guys, but again, I don't know if they're going to have the money. They're spending it on Melvin Gordon. Maybe it's the best fit, but maybe they can't do it. That's going to do it for the Friday edition of the PFF Free Agency Live. To make sure to follow PFF on Twitter and go to pff.com for all free agency coverage. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Tresh.
Cool.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, guys. See you around.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Later.
All right, bye.